everyone, and welcome to the regular update from Washington. As usual, this has been a busy week. I'd like to start with something I've spent a lot of time on, which is the, I believe, baseless effort to try to once again relitigate the 2020 election. You may recall this was a case where a few weeks back a search warrant was issued to look at the election results from Atlanta, Fulton County. And one of the mysterious things that happened was, why in the heck was the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, on the scene when she has nothing to do with domestic election security? There was some confusing answers that came after that. One saying she said the president asked her to be there, which begs the question of why would the president even know about a search warrant being issued? I mean, these were the kind of abuses that were corrected with the reforms after Watergate. And then Ms. Gabbard suddenly said, well, there must have been some foreign nexus. Well, earlier this week, the affidavit that was issued was revealed. And I wasn't surprised, but this was all based upon debunked conspiracy theories by a gentleman named Mr. Odin, Ken Odin. And by the way, this guy has been sanctioned because of his illicit and inappropriate behavior after the 2020 election. And this guy is still somehow in the intelligence community rambling around, trying to dig up dirt on 2020 because Donald Trump just can't get over the fact that he lost. So again, begs the question, what was Tulsi Gabbard doing there? This was not her job. Matter of fact, she's actively done things to unravel election security in terms of foreign influence, which would be her job. But there was something called the Foreign Malign Influence Center that she's disbanded. She worked with the equally inept Kash Patel to shut down some of the FBI activities about foreign interference. And we've seen the more overall administration-wide efforts to undermine and cut about a third of the funding for the cybersecurity agency that works with local elections officials to make sure they're hardened against cyber attacks. So why was she there? I believe she's obviously not involved in anything with foreign policy. She's not been involved in any of the briefings on Venezuela, on Iran, on China, on NATO. It appears to be a pathetic effort to try to get back in the good graces of her boss. It's dangerous, it's inappropriate, it's unprofessional, and along with Senator Padilla, who is the ranking member on the Rules Committee, we've asked her to come testify before Congress. What is she doing? Why is she doing it? And why isn't she doing the job that she was, I believe, still unfortunately confirmed to? On top of that, we have continued comments about the president nationalizing elections, which is totally against the Constitution. We see the president and his Department of Justice try to bring charges against 2 members of the Senate, Senator Kelly and Senator Slotkin from Michigan, and 4 House members, literally for exercising the First Amendment rights. And the fact that the grand jury, which virtually never happened, said there's no violation here and turned down the indictment is an indication that, thank goodness, there is still part of our constitutional system is holding. And we also have the ongoing debate about the role of ICE, and I know I've raised constant concerns about the idea of ICE roving patrols showing up at polling stations. I know people have said to me, well, Senator, if you're an American citizen and legally able to vote, why should you be worried if ICE is there? Well, let me give you a couple examples. One, we have definitely seen in Minnesota and in Virginia, ICE, I believe, discriminate against folks of Latino heritage, whether they're citizens or not. We have a number of families that are mixed status, some legal, some not legal, who will be scared away from voting. And then we've also got, if you're saying, well, that still didn't apply to me, ICE is collecting personal information on American citizens using some of the major tech companies. Do you really trust ICE to have that information about you? And for them having that information, it doesn't take much to dissuade Americans from voting to start with, but it can have an enormously chilling effect. And I'm increasingly concerned about the integrity of our elections in 26. I'm concerned it appears that we're going to have a statewide referendum on redistricting on April 21st. I'm concerned that they may try out some of their tactics in Virginia before this fall's elections. And I have more to say about this, but it is of enormous concern. I wanted to raise the issue. I'm sorry about one item here. I'm going to just refresh my memory. I'm going to end on 2 things that actually were good news, and I don't get a lot of good news on this job these days. One was yesterday. 6 House Republicans joined with all the Democrats to say, no to Trump's tariffs on Canada. Canada, our biggest trading partner, I believe it is still Virginia's biggest trading partner, it and China go back and forth. These tariffs are a tax on Virginians. And the fact that there's now been both the Senate and the House, and I want to compliment my friend Tim Kaine, who's been leading this effort in the Senate, to say, no, we're not going to put this tax in place illegally, because this is before the Supreme Court. And at the end of the day, not just Canada, but Mexico, but the tariffs that he's raised all across the world, we've gone from an average tariff rate of about 2.3% to over 18%. That is a tax. And whether it shows up in prices now or whether it shows up in the cost of manufacturing, Americans are paying it. And that's one of the reasons why Americans are so uniformly rejecting this president, because he's not brought prices down. He's not focused on, obviously, on decreasing healthcare costs, where he's taking healthcare away. He's so obsessed about whether relitigating 2020 or sticking America, his nose into international affairs everywhere. This was going to be the guy that was going to end foreign wars. And instead, he has deployed American troops in 6 different countries. And in the meantime, is managing to offend all our allies. So it was good news coming out of the House yesterday that now the House and the Senate in bipartisan way said no to these Trump tariff taxes. And then finally, one, again, small ball, but I've had bipartisan legislation for a while, but Senator Kennedy from Louisiana that finally signed into law that basically says, how do we stop the IRS from making payments to dead people? Now, you'd think that shouldn't be that hard, but we've had to pass a law that basically says on the do not pay list and the list of data about who have died, they are coming together. It is now part of the law, and well, it was not a huge number. Any of these stories where somebody who's dead gets paid by the federal government just lends credibility to the notion that everything in the government is inept. So at least this loophole has now been closed, and for those deceased recently or otherwise, don't expect any more federal dollars. So with that, let me turn it over to Catherine. I'm happy to take your questions.
Our first question is from Mitchell, WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Thanks a lot for joining us. By the way, I enjoyed your reference to small ball since we still have all this snowcrete on the ground. Baseball season just a few months away. But at any rate, more pressing, obviously, the issue related to DHS. What are your concerns with Congress likely to head out of town here without this being resolved? Are you worried in any way that this issue is going to languish without any reforms and that the issue could kind of go back to a back burner at some point?
Well, I'm concerned about that, but I also know that the reforms that we asked for, that I think are overwhelmingly supported by the American people, if you cut through all the details, it's basically saying that I should operate on the same principles that our local police force do. No mask, identify yourself, get a warrant if you're going to search somebody's house. These are basic policing responsibilities that ICE has kind of abused. So I think the American public's for these reforms. I would point out, and this is one of the issues that ICE got so overly funded with a big ugly bill last summer that they're not going to cut off their funds. And even with issues like TSA and FEMA, there are funds available in those accounts. And I don't think it will get pushed back. I mean, nobody's going to miss a paycheck for at least the next couple of weeks. But I think it has to be dealt with. And I just feel like there was a lack of seriousness from the White House. I've not reviewed all the documents that came in last night. I'm going to get that update in about 30 minutes. But reasonable people could have sat down and worked this out. And and now we see the announcement today that they're going to shut down the operations in Minneapolis. I'll believe it when I see it. But if they shut it down in Minneapolis, doesn't mean the same kind of ICE search couldn't happen in Richmond tomorrow, or Norfolk tomorrow, or in Fairfax County. So we got to have a reform system.
Our next question is from Jacob with Scripps News.
Hi, Senator. Thanks as always for holding this call. Two questions on two separate topics, if I may. First, we discussed last week this whistleblower complaint that's making its way through ODNI. And as you may have seen, there's been some back and forth between the lawyers representing the whistleblower and the general counsel at ODNI about whether the whistleblower and their attorney should be able to provide Congress directly with the complaint in some sort of classified setting. ODNI seems to say that they're not lawfully able to do so. I just wanted to ask if it's your understanding that the whistleblower is allowed to provide, certain congressional offices or officials with the unredacted complaint, and similarly, if you've been in touch at all with the whistleblower or their team as all of these developments have unfolded. And then secondly, just on a point you mentioned in your opening remarks about the Trump administration trying and failing to secure this indictment against those lawmakers. As you may have seen, former White House counsel Bob Bauer today called for a revamping of the independent counsel statute to try to prevent any presidential administration from weaponizing the Justice Department against sitting lawmakers. Wanted to get your reaction if that's something that you might be supportive of Congress trying to take action on. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me take them in reverse order. I've not seen Bob Bauer's proposal, but on the face of it, it seems to make sense. We read about other countries where, a dictator or somebody in power goes after his political or her political opposition and arrests lawmakers. That's never happened in our country. And now the fact that they brought such a bogus indictment against these members of Congress, that my understanding is they didn't get a single vote amongst the grand jury. That is a stunning statement on how badly put together this plan was of pursuing political enemies. But, as we've seen, I don't know if they're out of legal jeopardy, whether they're going to try to go to another grand jury. We actually heard, we've heard where grand juries wouldn't invite indicted Jim Comey at one point, and the case then fell apart. But if you can continue to use and harass your political opponents using the power of the Justice Department, you're still going to run up huge legal bills. It's un-American. Nobody has said what these members said was not protected by the First Amendment or protected by the speech and debate clause in the Constitution. So it's mind-boggling to me. And again, it's you guys know I've been accused a lot of times of being way too bipartisan, but I have been so disappointed. We've heard a few Republican members speak out, but why there's not universal condemnation, why there's not anybody that says Congress needs to be separate and not subject to the political retribution of a president. This is how a democracy unwinds. So I'm pretty disappointed with my friends for not speaking up on this issue. On the whistleblower complaint, a couple of things. I won't go through all of the details because it's pretty complicated. But let's start with the basic fact. Whistleblower. Well, let me also say on whether the whistleblower. I have not talked to the whistleblower or their attorney. We always leave that again. Throughout my tenure on the Intelligence Committee, they make the initial approach to our staff. The staff does the first review, and I'm not actually sure whether the whistleblower's lawyer has reached out. I think they've expressed interest, but I'm not sure. But let's go through what we do know. This whistleblower brought a complaint in May. The Director of National Intelligence, based upon testimony of her then General Counsel, her now Assistant General Counsel, briefed the DNI in June, outlining some of her legal obligations. We, the Congress, didn't get even indication there was a complaint until November. And there was usually the obligation that you're supposed to report within 21 days. It took from November till February till we got the complaint. And this was, again, a bipartisan request from the whole Gang of Eight. I obviously can't comment on the substance of the complaint, but frankly, I can't even make a judgment on the substance of the complaint because it was so redacted. So we have asked for some of the underlying intelligence. We've asked to try to get it redacted, at least at the Gang of Eight level. And in terms of the lawyers' willingness to try to bring the complaint to the committees, this is a little bit of what the director is hanging her hat on, but it doesn't pass the smell test. You've got this obligation to report, but then there's a bit of ambiguity about the legal guidance the ODNI is supposed to give to the whistleblower's attorney about how they present that information. So you've got to get legal guidance on how to come forward. And it appears they've just been dragging their feet on that and punting it. So she says, well, she had no obligation. Well, I don't think any reasonable person would have thought that if the whistleblower brought the complaint in May, that now in February, months and months later, they wouldn't have gotten basic legal guidance on how you present it in a way that's appropriate. So, I feel this is a dereliction of duty from the ODNI. I feel this was an effort to, not just keep this from me, but it's an effort to keep it from the whole Gang of Eight.